Your parents bought their first home at 28, you are 31, still renting, and your landlord just raised the rent again. What changed? That is not a rhetorical question. Something actually, specifically, systematically changed. And it did not happen by accident. The housing market in America did not just get expensive. It got redesigned. And most renters are still playing a game whose rules shifted underneath them years ago, without anyone sending a memo. Today, we are going to break down exactly what happened. Why renting is no longer a stepping stone to owning. Why the gap between renting and buying has never been wider in modern American history. And what the people who actually understand this system are doing differently right now. Let us start with a number that should make you stop and think. In 1980, the average American home cost about 3 times the average annual household income. You saved for a few years, you made a down payment, and the mortgage was manageable. It was hard, but it was reachable. In 2026, the average home price in the United States sits at roughly $400,000. The median household income is around $78,000. That is more than 5 times income. And in cities like Austin, Denver, Miami, and Los Angeles, that ratio is closer to 8 or 10 times. The math stopped working, and it stopped working for a very specific set of reasons. The first reason is interest rates. For most of the 2010s, mortgage rates were historically low. We are talking 3%, sometimes below. A $400,000 home with 3% down and a 3% rate meant a monthly payment around $1,700. Tight, but doable for a dual-income household. Then 2022 happened. The Federal Reserve raised interest rates aggressively to fight inflation. Mortgage rates climbed from 3% to over 7%. That same $400,000 home now costs over $2,600 a month, just in principal and interest, before taxes, insurance, or HOA fees. That is nearly $1,000 more per month, every single month, for the same house. A lot of first-time buyers looked at that math and said no. They stayed renters. And that decision, made by millions of people simultaneously, created the second problem. Demand for rentals exploded. When people cannot buy, they rent. When millions of people rent at the same time, landlords notice. And when landlords notice, rents go up. Between 2021 and 2024, average rents across major U.S. cities rose by over 30%. In some Sunbelt cities, they rose 50, 60, even 70% in 3 years. So renters were now paying more to rent and still could not afford to buy. The trap was fully closed. But here is where the story gets more complicated and more interesting. The people who already owned homes before 2022 did something very rational. They stayed put. If you locked in a 3% mortgage in 2020, why would you sell your house, give up that rate, and buy a new one at 7%? You would not. So they did not. This created what economists call the lock-in effect. Existing homeowners froze. The number of homes listed for sale dropped dramatically. Supply dried up. And when supply drops while demand stays high, prices do not fall. They stay elevated, or they keep climbing. By 2025, the U.S. housing market was running on a fraction of its normal inventory. In a healthy market, there are typically around 1.5 million homes for sale at any given time. In 2024 and into 2025, that number was sitting closer to 600,000, less than half the normal supply. This is not just a pricing problem, it is a structural problem, and it was not fixed by the time we got to 2026. Now let us talk about the other player in this story, the one most people forget about: institutional investors. Starting around 2012, large investment firms began buying single-family homes in bulk. Companies like Invitation Homes, Progress Residential, and various private equity funds identified a simple opportunity: buy homes, rent them out, and collect steady cash flow. By 2022, institutional investors owned an estimated 5 to 8% of all single-family rental homes in the United States. In specific markets, like Atlanta, Phoenix, and Charlotte, that number was significantly higher. Now, 5 to 8% might not sound enormous. But in a market with thin supply, even a small increase in competition for homes has an outsized effect on prices. These investors were not buying one house. They were buying 50 houses in the same neighborhood, in cash, above asking price, in the same week. A regular buyer with a mortgage pre-approval and a 30-day closing timeline simply cannot compete with that. So a new renter class emerged. College-educated, employed, financially responsible people who in any previous generation would have bought homes by their early 30s, now renting indefinitely, not by choice, by math. And here is the part that is genuinely alarming. Renting long-term is expensive in a way that is not always obvious. When you rent, 100% of your monthly payment goes to your landlord. You build zero equity, zero ownership, zero wealth. Over 10 years of renting at $2,000 a month, you have paid $240,000, and you own nothing, not a single brick. When you buy, even at a high interest rate, a portion of every payment builds equity. The house appreciates over time. You are building an asset. The wealth gap between long-term owners and long-term renters compounds over decades in a way that is staggering. A homeowner who bought in 2015 and stayed put has, in many cities, seen their net worth increase by $200,000, $300,000, even $400,000, just from property appreciation. A renter in that same period spent the equivalent amount on rent and has nothing to show for it in terms of assets. This is not about fault. It is about a system that rewards those who got in early and punishes those who could not or cannot now. So what can you actually do in 2026? The honest answer is that the traditional path, save for a down payment, buy a starter home, build equity, trade up, is genuinely harder than it was 10 years ago. But it is not impossible, and there are strategies that people are actually using right now. The first is geographic arbitrage. The national average home price is misleading because it includes San Francisco and Manhattan. In places like Cleveland, Memphis, Columbus, Kansas City, and Huntsville, median home prices are still under $250,000. Remote work made it possible, for the first time, to choose where you live based on affordability rather than where your office happens to be. A lot of people are taking that option seriously. The second is house hacking. This is when you buy a small multi-unit property, a duplex, triplex, or small apartment building, live in one unit, and rent out the others. Your tenants pay down your mortgage. In some cases, they cover it entirely. You build equity while living for free or close to it. It requires more work than just owning a single-family home, but it is one of the most effective wealth-building tools available to a first-time buyer in a high-cost environment. The third is changing the down payment math. Many first-time buyers think they need 20% down to avoid private mortgage insurance, but FHA loans allow as little as 3.5% down. VA loans for veterans allow 0 down. USDA loans for rural properties allow 0 down. The barrier to entry is lower than most people realize. The real barrier is the monthly payment, and that comes back to rate and price. The fourth, and this one is less talked about, is patience combined with positioning. Mortgage rates are cyclical. They went from 3% to over 7%. At some point, they will come back down, not to 3% necessarily, but to 5, maybe 5.5%. When that happens, millions of frozen homeowners will list their properties, supply will flood back into the market, and for a window of time, there will be both more inventory and lower payments. Being financially ready for that window, credit score in order, savings building, debt managed, is genuinely one of the smartest moves a renter can make right now. Here is the truth that holds everything together. The housing crisis in 2026 is not the result of one bad decision. It is the result of a decade of low rates that inflated prices, followed by a rapid rate spike that froze the market, layered on top of decades of underbuilding and increasing investor competition. No single villain, no single fix. But understanding the system, really understanding it, changes how you move inside it. Most people feel trapped by the housing market because they are waiting for it to return to something it may never return to. A $200,000 home in a major coastal city, a 3% mortgage rate, a starter home for a single income. The people who are winning right now are not waiting for that world. They are navigating this one with different cities, different strategies, different timelines. You cannot afford to rent forever, and the market will not make it easy to buy. But the gap between those two realities is exactly where the opportunity lives. The question is whether you are going to find it.